Good morning, everyone. It's been a great morning so far. It was great to hear Alex speak this morning. And for the next half hour, I'm going to talk to you about how to become a baller at your purpose. You guys ready for that? So how many of you in the room have a purpose? Every single person has a purpose. The question is, do they know what their purpose is? How many of you feel like you know what your purpose is? So about a little more than half of you. How many of you constantly make decisions about your learning, your development, which jobs you take, what you do based on that purpose? A smaller group. This, I believe, and the research shows, is the future of how we develop people. It's not about becoming a great engineer. It's not about what we are. It's about what we do, and it's about our purpose. And at the end of the day, careers are about, when they're deeply fulfilling, full of purpose, as Alex talked about, the goal is to become a baller at your purpose. It's a very different way of thinking about work and thinking about growth. And I'm going to challenge you today, based on our research, to really think about how does purpose play a role in how you are developing talent at your organizations. For me, I just want to quickly share who my boss is. All of you have a boss, I assume. My boss is my 11-year-old daughter, named Lola. Last year, she did a lot of volunteering for Hillary Clinton for president. And the night of the election, she and all of her friends came over. And we had this massive party. We had like a blow-up doll of Hillary. We had everything up. And at the end of the night, the girls were sobbing, incredibly upset. Not for all the reasons you might think, but a lot of it was about that female empowerment. But there was something else that really bothered them. They said, in school, they're taught not to bully. Why don't grown-ups get that bullies should not be allowed in politics? And I said, it's because we didn't in school get taught about bullying. We were taught how to deal with bullies, but we weren't taught that bullying was bad. We weren't taught that for those of us that were older. And what we did is we gathered all those girls, and we went to Washington, D.C., and we sat down with Nancy Pelosi, we sat down with John Lewis, 40 different members of Congress and the Senate, and had them sign a pledge to stop bullying. It was absolutely incredible experience. And I think about my daughter and the workforce she's going to enter in 10 years. It's got to be different than the one that we have today. And that's why she's my boss. I want to make sure I work with all of you to change work so that it's the workforce and the environment that my daughter ultimately is going to enter. My background, I'm a serial social entrepreneur. My last organization was called the Taproot Foundation. Do any of you know of the Taproot Foundation? Handful. I started the Taproot Foundation for a very simple reason. Nonprofit organizations need marketing, technology, HR, finance, strategy help, just like your companies, but they're generally priced out of that market. They can't afford that talent. And it occurred to me that there was a market opportunity to be able to get business professionals, not to volunteer time in a soup kitchen, but to actually build the infrastructure of the nonprofit sector. And over a few years, we scaled to be the largest nonprofit consulting firm in the country. We then realized that wasn't enough, and we scaled and worked with the White House to create a campaign that ultimately led to a marketplace for pro bono services that was $15 billion a year, and then started popping up with affiliates all around the world. It was an incredible experience. I became a student of purpose and intrinsic motivation. Because people who are working on pro bono work aren't paid, and they can't get promoted. They work for the sake of work. They work for the purest sense of what work is, and this is the greatest laboratory for understanding how we need to change our organizations so that we understand everyone who shows up every day is, at the end of the day, a volunteer. Because they have a lot of choices about where they're going to go, and it teaches us how we should manage and how we take care of people. Taproot was wildly successful. We heard over and over again, people's experience was better than their daytime jobs. They're like, this is so much better. And at Taproot, we celebrated like crazy. We were like, this is amazing. We have created Disneyland for work, right? Disneyland's the happiest place on earth. We had created this incredible experience around pro bono work. But then we realized, and me especially, that just like Disneyland, with the exception of a few creepy people, no one lives at Disneyland, right? We all know a few people that spend a little too much time there. And I left Taproot to start Imperative to figure out how do we make the rest of our lives, how do we make the rest of our work as fulfilling as pro bono work? And that has been the journey we've been on. What we found in a study we did with NYU a couple years ago was that 66% of the US workforce is unfulfilled. I want you to think about that, and this is not about engagement, it's about fulfillment, which is a much more important metric than engagement. Think about that at a human level, an individual person, for someone to be spending the majority of their time doing something that's not feeding their soul. Think about that at an organizational level, that 2/3 of the population are not fulfilled and therefore are not producing, they're not great teammates, they're creating all kinds of challenges to your culture. Think about the lost opportunity. And think about it at a societal level. What a drain it is on our economy, on our society, et cetera, to have people who spend the majority of their time basically asleep at the wheel, and where work is actually depleting them, not helping them grow. Last year, we did a study of college students at 3 major universities, including the University of Michigan, the greatest college in the world. And no bias there at all. And what we found, which was really interesting, was that 31% of these students said they would rather graduate with a degree in a purpose than a subject. Think about that, right? So we all went to school, you had to pick a major, it was a subject. It was usually a very narrow path to be able to learn. Why do you guys think people would rather major in a purpose than a subject? Anyone just want to shout out like why that might be? Passion. Easy A. Oh, it's the hardest. It's the hardest A. Any other thoughts? Values? Yep, absolutely. What we saw was it was a number of things. It was about making an impact. They knew they were spending 4 years, and they felt like, I want while I'm here to do something that matters, not just do things that are for me. They had the need for intrinsic motivation. They were saying, I want to do what I want to do, not what I'm expected to do, not what my parents say I need to do, but to actually chart my own course and to do things that feed my soul. They also were much smarter than the teachers and the faculty in that they understood that life is interdisciplinary, it's not narrow. And that when you think about purpose, it's something that requires every single sort of knowledge a little bit about a lot of things, and it's much more tied to the real world than these narrow subjects that we look at in school. It's also experiential learning. We all know that you learn a lot better doing stuff than reading things, watching videos, going to a class. We learn best by doing. In most classrooms, we don't do enough doing. And when you major in a purpose, the thought was, I'd actually get to do more and learn from doing, and therefore be able to have real-world application. And when I go to get a job, I'll have actual experience, not just said, I'm a chemistry major. I think we can learn a lot from these students. And this is the future. These are not millennials. This is the generation coming after them about how learning needs to change, that purpose is a pathway, and that purpose lights up individuals to realize their potential. In that same NYU study, and another one we did with LinkedIn, looking at purpose around the world, we found that when people work with purpose at the forefront of how they approach work, they outperform in every single metric we could measure the people who don't. Whether it's their fulfillment, their actual performance, their net promoter score, tied to every core competency that the companies we've studied looked at, there was no case in which someone working without purpose was a benefit. No example of that at all. What we're finding is that purpose is the key thing that unlocks talent. It unlocks intrinsic motivation, which enables people to chart their own course instead of just responding to what they're told or what's expected of them. A lot of this is based on neuroscience. How many of you knew there's a blue jelly bean in our brains? I just learned this from someone. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I was really excited about this because I love jelly beans. So there's this thing called a pituitary gland. It looks like a jelly bean, and it produces oxytocin. And that when we work with purpose, it's shown to actually produce more of it, which builds trust and a sense of belonging. And we all know that to be successful in a work environment, to be a successful leader, to be successful as a member of a team, trust is critical. And purpose brings this out in a large scale. It enables a lot of that blue jelly bean to course through your brain and the rest of your body. So it's absolutely critical, just from a pure neurological sense, to have people in that purpose zone while they're working, which means they have to be focused on what they intrinsically care about and having a sense of self-awareness around it. So, purpose, we believe, is the key Just like Popeye, remember Popeye ate his can of spinach, and suddenly his muscles grew like crazy, and he could kick ass with any bad guy? We believe purpose is the key thing to turn everyone into a superhero and to enable them to chart their own course in their career to figure out what they're doing. But the challenge with purpose to date is that it's been about poetry, right? It's been about everyone trying to sort of create a poetic statement about their purpose. It's not been something that people can really own and integrate into their careers, and that as a company, you can integrate. What we have done at Imperative, my company, is created data science around purpose. We've taken something that was poetry and turned it into a model that enables us to predict what someone's purpose is in 10 minutes. We've had people that have gone through years of executive coaching, working on their purpose, and then they take this assessment and it gets the exact same result in 10 minutes. We are able to replicate that process because we've understood the patterns psychologically that generate purpose for people. And what this enables you to do is to start looking at predictive models around purpose. So if I know what your purpose is, I can start to think about how do you become a baller at that purpose? What is the career path? Who are other people you should meet? What is your leadership style going to be? We can start to predict and develop pathways based on purpose, not just on function. Because we've taken purpose and turned it into data. And think about this. This changes initially how we think about talent, but ultimately, the ability to break purpose, something that we need at our core to thrive, into data science means that we can radically change how we think about how we approach everything from selling goods to volunteering to the work we do to what articles we read, et cetera. It's opening up a whole nother lens in which we can look at our lives, our society. What we found in the research and what we work on is that there are 24 different purpose archetypes, that everyone roughly fits into one of these 24 archetypes that are based on 3 variables. And I want to share with you just one of those variables just to get your head around it. We found that people gain a sense of meaning at 3 different elevations. And none of them are better than worse, but it's almost evenly divided. Some people in the bottom elevation really gain a sense of meaning from helping people. They want to see that their work actually helps a real person, that they have that physical connection, that they see that impact, right? Think of the doctor, right? The next elevation are people who say, it's lovely to help someone, but I really don't get a strong sense of fulfillment unless I'm helping a team or an organization, an institution build sustained impact. That's where you gain excitement. And then the final group at the societal level says, you know, it's lovely that you're helping people, it's great that you're building organizations, but unless I feel like I'm part of moving the needle on something bigger than any one person or organization, it doesn't really float my boat. It doesn't give me goosebump moments. Think about the implications of this in terms of your career and how you approach it, in terms of what you would need to learn to be incredible at that elevation, in terms of how you would set your goals so that they're framed in a way in which they're personally meaningful to you. Once you unlock what someone's psychological purpose is, you're able to dovetail what you're trying to accomplish into a pathway that they get. I love that mixed metaphor. I'm picturing like a dovetail and a path. It's an incredible image. This enables us to create pathways that previously were not possible because of the data. And I want to share with you an example of this. So I write for Fast Company regularly, profiling CEOs that are purpose-driven about their purpose and how it shows up in their work. And David Blake was one of the people who I interviewed and wrote a feature on. Some of you may have seen about him and his purpose. He and I basically have the same job. We're both CEOs of tech-based companies working in the field of HR and talent. But when you look at our purpose, they're radically different, right? In our system, David is what we call the pillar, and I'm what's called the empowerer. Very different approaches to the exact same job, and therefore very different paths to achieving success. David is first and foremost about building structures that change the way society works. He's about building structures, building new processes that change the way we fundamentally look at issues. And that's what Degreed is. It radically shakes up how we think about learning. That's what created his breakthrough innovation. It speaks to how he manages his company. It speaks to who he is as a leader. And he's wildly successful at that. On the other hand, my currency is empathy and social engagement. I create change through movements. I create change through other people. It's the way in which I build our product. It's the way in which I work with other people. It's all about empowerment and enabling people to lead on their own. Structure is there, but it's really a secondary thought to it. And this defines why working for me would be radically different than working for David. And we're both successful, but radically different. And that difference is defined in that purpose. You know, you look at other CEOs, whether it's from Steelcase, Athleta, YWCA, SAP, Campbell's Soup. As I talk to each of these people who have the exact same job, they're all CEOs, they all have had a different purpose, and that purpose is what defined their success. It defined their path. It defined how they innovate. It defined how they managed. And therefore, they each, to get there, needed different ways of learning to get there for the exact same job. And this speaks to how just training for a job isn't enough. We need to train to the diversity of purpose and understand that people have different contributions they want to make to the world, different superhero powers. Spider-Man is very different than Superman, right? You can't teach them the same way. Spider-Man is never going to have webs, right? And Spider-Man is never going to be able to fly. They're very different superheroes, and we need to help develop that superhero by accelerating the adoption of this idea of diversity of purpose. So as you look at it, in our system, it creates a comic book cover for each purpose type. So for David, who's a pillar, it says, in a world where the elite make the rules. Sorry, I can't see from here. In a world where the elite make the rules, work for them, the pillar builds new systems that ensure everyone can succeed. That's kind of degreed, right? On the other hand, for me, the empower, and I'm a penguin, in a world where organizations value management over leadership, the empower rallies all stakeholders around a transformational vision they can share. So each of us have these superpowers, and we need to understand what those superpowers are in order to develop. Otherwise, we're following someone else's path, or we're following things that are extrinsic motivations, not intrinsic motivation. When we adapt our learning strategy to focus on purpose, it does a number of things that are critical right now in our marketplace. So one is it builds adaptability, because it's no longer I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer. It's I'm an empowerer, and I can use that skill across a wide range of roles within an organization. We did an experiment, you guys will like this, early on at Imperative, where we asked our team to find someone in our database with the exact same purpose as them, but it had a job that they thought sucked, right? And we said, shoot them an email and ask if you can do an informational interview, right? So they did that. They all did like an hour informational interview with that person. And with the exception of one person, they all came back with two conclusions. One is, I want to be that person's friend. And that job actually sounds kind of awesome. But before, they would never even have looked at that opportunity within an organization. We have blinders on because we're not looking at opportunities through the lens of our purpose. We're looking at it through social stereotypes, what the people look like in that role, what their education is. It's greatly limiting our ability to be adaptable. But when you work through the lens of purpose, you realize you can attack any challenge if you're able to use your superpowers. And it widens the ability for people to move around in an organization. It also encourages a growth mindset, because it's not about this sort of static sense of learning a skill. It's about fundamentally becoming a baller and better at your purpose. And there's a constant desire to learn. It also begins with self-awareness. To become an effective manager, to become a leader, you need to have self-awareness. And we can talk about building skills, et cetera, but at the end of the day, if we're not self-aware, we're traveling on someone else's path. We're not traveling on our own path, and we'll never realize our potential. Another major difference it makes is it puts the employee in the driver's seat. A lot of you are talking about what your company needs to do, right? What does your company need to do to help people grow? In the modern economy, it's up to each individual to grow. If someone says, I had no opportunities to grow this year, it's bullshit. Utter bullshit. Everyone has opportunities to grow every day. The question is, are they taking advantage of them? Are they pushing themselves? They can't just wait for this conveyor belt of learning. They've got to step up and find ways to learn. And when people have that self-awareness, when people realize their potential through purpose, it puts them in the driver's seat to build that. It also focuses on intrinsic motivation, what actually we want, versus extrinsic motivation. What is operating out of fear or a need to prove ourselves, to play someone's game. It enables us to work out of intrinsic motivation, which every study shows makes people more resilient, it makes people more successful, and it makes them fulfilled. Finally, it emphasizes experiential learning. Because to become incredible at your purpose, you can't do that sitting in a cubicle all by yourself. You got to go rub up against the world. You have to go out there and apply your superpower skills in the real world. That is how you learn first and foremost. So it really takes advantage of what we've all known, which is experiential learning is the #1 way to learn. Having people take personal ownership and have intrinsic motivation to do it versus fear, like if I don't take this class, I won't get the next job. But instead, I can't realize my potential. I can't become a baller at my powers without it. I want to give an example. We've been doing this for about 18 months. We're working with around 60 major employers. And Campbell's is one of the employers that we've been doing a lot of work with, of rolling this out and basically changing the talent management strategy to be around how can you develop based on your purpose? How can you maximize and become a baller at your purpose, knowing then that you can move all around this organization. There are so many roles. You truly can spend a career here once you understand what your purpose is and all the different ways to apply it. How do you set up learning pathways based on that? How do you develop managers based on that, et cetera, so that people are fundamentally showing up to work based on their purpose and recognizing the organizations invested in them and creating space for them to develop as actual human beings, not as human resources or assets, as Alex said earlier. The fundamental core belief behind this research and our philosophy is purpose is a choice. Every day when someone comes to work, they decide whether or not to show up with purpose and to direct with purpose, or out of fear or extrinsic motivation or other things that push them and pull them in different ways. Each person needs to own purpose and have that self-awareness, and each organization has to decide whether or not they want to create the space, create the psychological safety to empower people to actually show up to work as their full selves, and not just say it and mean you can wear jeans to work. That is not showing up as your full self. Showing up as your full self is bringing your purpose to work. That is who you are. It's not about your gender. It's not about your skin color. It's not based on where you're born. It's about who you are inside and the contribution you were meant to make in the world and embracing someone for that. And it's truly the greatest form of inclusion and belonging. So I want to leave some time for questions. But I also want to offer, for those of you that have cell phones, and I know only a few of you have cell phones, if any of you want to try taking our purpose assessment, it's a 10-minute assessment that defines your purpose and how to go about building your career around purpose. Offering to provide a free one to anyone in the room by just emailing me, aaron@imperative.com, and putting in the subject line, I choose purpose. Because at the end of the day, it is your choice. You decide to choose purpose or you decide to ignore it. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening to me, and also just open it up for questions for the last 7 minutes or so. Any questions out there? Yes, please.
Do I need a mic now?
I can repeat it until that's possible, or we'll play along.
2 questions.
Yeah.
What is your thinking on how purpose may shift or evolve?
Yep.
Is it finite? And the second is, for us as learning professionals, how do we get grounded in this, learn more about it? What should we be looking, reading, studying?
Great question. So does purpose change over time? And how can folks in the audience get to know more about purpose and how this works? So what we've seen is purpose does not change over time. What changes is someone's self-awareness around it. It's like peeling back an onion, right? So for example, at 21, if making an impact at an individual level is your jam, that will be the case throughout your career if that's truly sort of who you were at your core, because it's tied to psychological elements. When we see people change, it's largely because before they were operating too much out of an extrinsic mindset and projecting those things into their definition of themselves instead of being self-aware. So that's what we've seen consistently. In terms of learning, we've conducted major research on this, which is available on imperative.com. So we've got the studies we've done with NYU and LinkedIn. We're now doing a new study, if any of you are interested, with PwC over the next year, where we're doing a 12-city tour, meeting with CHROs, and looking at how do we get rid of employee engagement, because employee engagement is one of the main reasons why people are not actually being fulfilled at work. because of the way in which it's implemented and the mind frame in which it's used. We need to evolve to looking at fulfillment, and that's a whole other conversation. But if any of you are interested in that, also let me know. We're really excited to move this conversation forward. Yeah, sir. Yep. Yep. So how does organizational design impact the ability to be fulfilled and have work with purpose? So the way I think about it is that it's a lot like money, right? So some people are minimum wage, some people make a good income, and some people are millionaires, right? And the same thing is true. Anyone in any job can get minimum wage purpose, a baseline of purpose if they're operating in it. But to become a millionaire with purpose, you do need a culture in which there's that ability to have a level of autonomy, which ties to design. You need to have psychological safety where people are willing to take risks and show up that way is really critical. And there needs to be the ability to move around the organization and not get typecast as only being in this role and there's no way to move around. Those are the three things that we see being critical to making purpose possible from a design perspective. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. 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 So how do you connect purpose to business results to make sure this is the case? So first of all, Ernst & Young did a great study a year or two ago surveying CEOs about their attitude towards this. And 87% said their organization had to have a purpose beyond profit. So CEOs get this. The challenge I'm finding is how do we do it, not should we do it? Because, okay, great, I should do purpose. What the hell is that? How do I do it? And that's why we've really been focused on the data science, because until we can convert this to data, we can't build technology to do it. We can't scale it. I can't figure out what we have in common based on purpose, and therefore can't build community around it. So that's been key. And then doing these studies where we've shown that people who work with purpose outperform their colleagues in every single measure, right? Teams that are motivated and inspired are 125% more productive. And in that EY study, they found that companies that are driven by purpose at the company level are 202% more likely to see revenue growth. So this has been really well documented in terms of the case. The challenge to us as a community is how to implement it, how to make it systemic, how to not have it as a bolt-on, but instead be part of all of our talent systems. So we have time for a couple more questions. Yeah?
I got a mic now.
We got a mic. Sarah's got a mic.
Don't worry.
And she can run. She's a superhero. Yeah.
I'd love to hear, great job, by the way.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on Strengths Quest, Strengths Finder, Myers-Briggs, a lot of organizations that use that as kind of a framework for, in essence, creating that learning path and some of the ideas or thoughts on how this may supersede that.
Yep. So great question about, how does this compare to other sort of workplace assessments? I was thinking about it. What I've seen, and I'm going to start this off with an asterisk that I obviously have a bias here, which is not surprising to anyone. What personality assessments tend to do is they tell you what your weather pattern is. And when you enter a room with other weather patterns, what's likely to be the overall weather pattern. So if someone's sunny and someone's cloudy, it's sunny with a chance of rain, right? And therefore you know in a group like what's going to be the dynamic. But it doesn't really predict career. It doesn't really predict success. And there's no real way to build to become better at your personality. That's not the way that works. StrengthsFinder is awesome in that it said, you know what, you don't have to be great at everything. Be great at who you are. And I really believe in that philosophy. But it still looks at work like everyone is a tool, right? You guys are each a Swiss Army knife. And the question is, do you have a toothpick, a corkscrew, a knife, scissors? And then it's how can I be the best possible toothpick possible? And how can I, as a manager, pick the person with the toothpick when I've got something stuck in my teeth? So it's much more based on utility of assets and seeing people as assets instead of human beings. What purpose does, it brings that all together to actually look at people as human beings about what they are and what their contribution is, not just as an asset or a resource or a weather pattern. Because we're a lot more than our personality or skills. Last question in the back here.
Can I change my purpose?
What are you thinking you want to change it to?
Within those 24 archetypes,
Yep.
can I change my purpose?
So I think that's similar to the question up front earlier, which is, can you change it? I think it's not a question of changing it again. I think it's about becoming more self-aware about what actually brings you purpose versus being influenced by extrinsic motivation that may have caused you to go about doing this the wrong way. So I'll give you an example. A CEO I worked with took the assessment, and he said, I feel such guilt because every time I answer a question, I feel like I should answer the question to say I'm at the organizational level, because the organization should feel like that's what I care about most. But the reality is that's not what I care about. What I care about is society. So he started answering the questions based on what he thought other people wanted him to be instead of who he truly is. So the reality is we all have a purpose. The question is, how close are you to actually discovering honestly what that is? So the answer is not, can you change it? I think it's, can you get to know it better? Can you build that muscle? Can you build a career around that?